guys,
Hey.
welcome to Table Talk. We are glad you're here today for our discussion. But first, there were some eventful, I don't know, I guess games sort of kind of yesterday.
Oh yeah, yesterday was
this weekend,
championship Sunday.
Yeah, and you called it during worship. You called it.
Being a Steelers fan, I felt really bad having to
Ohio.
root for the Bengals, but hey, AFC North
Is it
football.
Bengals or Bagels? Or Bengals?
Bengals.
Bengals.
Bengal tires.
Bagels. I'm gonna blueberry bagel.
Yeah. You got bagels on your mind.
Like the tiger.
The tiger.
Bengal tiger.
The tiger.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Hey, tell how much I watch it.
First time in Super Bowl since 1988. So
wow, good for them.
Congrats to them.
Yeah, so, there's always a first time.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch it, but I heard it was a very interesting game too.
It went into overtime.
An inflection point.
Yes, there was
the message.
There were actually a couple of inflection points during that game. So
true.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
awesome. Well, Super Bowl is 2 weeks away now.
2 weeks away, yeah. Pro Bowl next week, which is basically a bunch of really good football players not trying real hard, so they don't want to get hurt.
Yeah, you're making all that money, like all that stuff. So anyway, we're talking about inflection points and math in the sermon, which was super fun.
Yeah. And I know some people really appreciated it.
They really liked it. They did.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised. But I'm good for all you guys that love math and are math science people. We're kindred spirits here. But
the rest of us that are not necessarily big on math need you people to help us get our numbers straight.
Yeah. But it was funny as I was like preparing for the message and just looking at my own life, at like even the life of this church community. And really thinking about those like inflection points, like where you're going one direction and then there was like a moment, a decision, a new path, and like that, you took a chance and chose to pursue that instead of going home, instead of stopping, instead of turning around. And just like how many times, like not to say things work out necessarily, but like that's like the key. Like it's almost like hadn't I done that, then that I wouldn't be where I am today, or I hadn't met this person, or hadn't done that. Like how many times that happens, and it just stood out to me. Like in Joseph's situation, like you've been having bad thing after bad thing happen, and he's kind of like punished for doing right and all. But how he takes the initiative. Like God gives him this opportunity to talk to Pharaoh, and he does it. So Jeff, like what comes to mind for you? When we talk about this?
I think. One of the things I think is that there is a way that you could look at the Joseph story and say there were multiple inflection points through there, So it's part of a challenge. I think that whenever we realize that we're maybe not even if we realize it, but when we encounter one of those points, to be able to not allow them to defeat us, I mean, in any one of those sequence of events that happened in Joseph's life, he could have just thrown up his hands and said, I quit.
I'm done.
He could have.
Especially in his faithfulness to God.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, sold into slavery, the whole deal in Potiphar's house, and then he ends up in prison. I mean, on the surface, those all look like pretty negative things, you know? And yet he was able to maintain this faith that said, well, this has got to be working out for something, and all of those could have ended up being a negative impact in his life if he would have allowed it to. I was sharing with you earlier that there's a book, it's been around a long time. The author's name is Piercing, and it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I enjoy motorcycles, so obviously the book intrigued me. But what it really is, it's a story about a guy who takes a trip across country on his motorcycle with his son, and he encounters all of these events along the way. But it's really a book about philosophy. And the one thing I was thinking about was he talks in the book about I think the terminology he uses is frustration points. He talks about encountering people who are like craftsmen and mechanics and, people that work with their hands a lot, and how they, the manual says, just do this and it'll work. But that's usually never the case. You know, usually something goes wrong.
Who even reads the manual anyway?
Yeah, well, that's right. Who reads the manual? You know,
men,
those are
guys.
just
Well,
I don't know. Sorry. I think as you get older, you start to realize, you know, maybe I can save some time reading the manual. You know? And but part of it is he talks about these frustration points, and he talks about having the joy of frustration, meaning that you can look at it as a challenge where you can grow and learn, or you can make it a place where you just jump off and quit. And how the people that we see as being, you know, in his case, great mechanics, great craftsmen, that kind of thing, are actually really people who have just as many struggles and just as many bad things happen, but instead of jumping off, they decide to keep pushing through, and they find a creativity and a resource that helps get them through, you know. And I wonder, you know, what you were saying about in your sermon is if, you know, that inflection point moment, and maybe those many for Joseph, you know, were moments where part of his faith was being able to look and say, you know, I wonder what God can do here, you know, instead of just throwing in the towel and saying, well, I guess I'm in prison the rest of my life. And
or I'm mad about this situation. I was wronged, you know, like that kind of like taking on that victim mentality. And he was wronged. Like he was accused of doing something he did not do. But even in the midst of it, to say, hey, you know what? But even in the midst of that, like instead of being defeated, taking on what could God do here?
You said something else in your sermon that caught my attention, was about how we at Table Life are going to start celebrating failure.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting. I think.
I mean, we're not like aiming for failure.
No.
I know. That's what I clarified. I was like, we're not like aiming for failure.
I was like cool. I'll fit right in. But I like that. You know, as a counselor, one of the things I look at is what they call family systems, and, you know, the whole systems theory about things. And I read an interesting article a few years back, and they were talking about how 9/11 changed parenting, and how parenting became driven by fear. And that, you know, like the one example in the article is that pre 9/11, even though there were cell phones, they were not allowed to even be on school grounds in most places.
Yeah.
Post 9/11, and then the things like the Columbine shootings and all those terrible things that happened after that, parents were going to school board meetings saying, my child will have a cell phone, they will have it on them, and they will be able to contact me. And so now you have schools that, you know, kids are in school with cell phones sitting on their desk and nobody says anything about it. And it's this driven idea that we need to protect because it's so dangerous. But what this guy in this article was saying is that what that has created is that we haven't learned how to fail and pick back up again, because we have like people protecting us all the time. And so now we only look at success, and if it looks threatening, we stay away from it.
Right.
You know.
Right. And I read something similar even about like childhood sports and activities and the as much as the, you know, we're not keeping score type thing, everybody gets the same trophy, everybody gets all that stuff. We're not teaching kids how to lose, how to be losers. You know, not to say we want everybody to be a loser, but like in life,
you need to learn how to lose well.
Yeah, you're not gonna win all the time. And I think, and then we see things acted out through actors, actresses, through politicians when they lose. Like we become poor losers for sports, and so I think there is something there. Like, and it can be paralyzing when you're so engrossed in thinking about, oh, what happens if I choose wrong? What if I choose failure? What if I, you know, and you wind up doing nothing about that. Instead of looking at, hey, no, what could the winning look like? You know, how could this turn out? And even if the worst thing happens and it turns into a flop, say it's a business venture or a new job or whatever the situation might, or going to a recovery meeting the first time, you have a bad experience, whatever, like that's the worst thing that can happen. It's kind of like not life or death.
Right.
Like this isn't like stepping off the mountaintop on, you know, a little rickety bridge, and like if you fall, you're going to die. Like, you know, you'll get back up. You'll be okay. And I tend to try to think that way when there's like a, you know, a potential inflection point, when there's a decision to make, say, hey, this could really change my life, and it will if I take it. It could be a good thing, or maybe it might not turn out as well. And thinking
Right.
about it, praying about, being prayerful about it. But in the end in the end of all of it, like just allowing God to use it.
Well, there's too many variables in life for us to think that it's just going to go smooth.
Yeah.
And I think that I always find it so fascinating that when you read the biographies and autobiographies of people that we deem as these were successful, these were great men, these were great women, and you really look, especially the autobiographies where they're just completely vulnerable about their experience, they pile up way more failures than
Yeah.
they do successes, but
Right.
they just don't quit.
Hmm.
They just, they know that at some point, kind of wrapping back around to the point of your sermon, they come back to that inflection point
Hmm.
and they see it and they're like, this is it. This is what I've been working for the last 30 years of my life or whatever, You mentioned Rosa Parks,
Yeah.
in your message. I mean, I think about like just the whole civil rights movement. I mean,
Yeah.
if you do a deep dive into the civil rights movement, there were way more reasons for them to quit. Martin Luther King and
Yeah.
others to just quit because of the opposition, but they just kept going. I mean, you think about how
And these
many
are normal,
times,
everyday people.
right?
Normal, like Rosa, like she's a normal, everyday person, but she sees this moment, and she has like all this that I've like been in school, like the class I took, the
Yeah.
participation, all the kind of head knowledge thing,
Mhm.
what to do if you're in this circumstance. Like it's like happening right now.
Yeah,
And like she wasn't any like hey like highfalutin famous popular person by any means,
no,
but she took a simple action
right,
and
right.
responded. And because of that, look at I mean that was also the start of Martin Luther King and his work,
Yeah.
because Rosa Parks chose to do that. It's
Right.
just interesting how it like trickles down.
I think in our own tradition, even from like a ministry religious standpoint, I mean, if you look at the life of what many people call our founder, Phineas Brzee, he was a complete flop.
Oh, he was. I know.
Yeah. And then,
He got fired.
he got fired, and churches failed, and
Right.
he ends up in California, and essentially he was
Yep.
just told, "Hey, we really don't need you in the church anymore." And then
Yep.
he encounters his friend, and they start the mission, and then the
Mhm.
next thing you know, this whole denomination is birthed out of that. And this guy was in
Yeah.
Brzee was in his like early to mid 50s
Right.
whenever it
He's
finally
established Methodist
clicked for
minister.
him.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think about those kind of things is that I think sometimes we anticipate that it's going to be successful and it's going to happen quick.
Mhm.
And part of that inflection point, I mean, it's easy when we read the Joseph story
Yeah.
because we can read, it goes through chapter 50, so it starts around chapter 37, I think, or something like that, the story.
Yeah.
So, it's 13 chapters.
Right.
You can read that in a couple hours if you're a slow reader,
Yeah.
and we don't realize this was his whole life.
Mhm.
Like we're talking decades of going through these
Oh,
things.
yeah.
It didn't happen quick.
Well, even from chapter 37 to where we saw 41,
Mm-hmm.
that's 13, 14 years
Right.
at least. Oh no, it's about 16 years at that point.
Right.
Which is it's like and for especially people at that time, like we're not living into the 80s, 90s like they do today.
Right.
So so that's a big chunk of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you the question: Do you think Joseph knew? Like we know because we read the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think Joseph knew when he suggested to Pharaoh, like made that very loaded suggestion? I think Pharaoh, you're going to need somebody to be in charge of all this and orchestrating the whole like preparation famine thing and all that stuff. Do you think he was thinking about himself? Do you think he was planning on that?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because when I read the scripture, it's not very clear. I mean, he gives that high suggestion to say, hey, I suggest that, you do these preparations and get these things in place. Do you think he was thinking of himself? Or, I don't know.
Boy, that's a really good question.
Is he being very clever?
I would say, well, let me say it this way.
I think he was.
Joseph was obviously at some level an optimistic person.
Yeah.
He had to be able to endure everything that he went through and still be on task. And one thing that I know about very optimistic people is they also believe they're capable.
Mm.
And so at times I could see in that situation as an optimistic person, him saying, I think this is what Pharaoh needs to do, and I'm going to throw it out there so he can hear it. And realizing there's a 50-50 chance here that he might pick me.
He might bite.
He might bite. Right. So, I would say the follow up to that would be is that even if Pharaoh would have not picked him, I think Joseph would have been okay with that too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think just and then you kind of see Pharaoh and like his buddies, all their reaction to what Joseph says, like basically like this guy has something like we could use here. So even if he might have not landed in that position, I think he would have been out of prison at that point.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Could have been the assistant director to the food distribution plant.
Yeah,
so
it's just interesting because I just with us like we have no idea what one decision.
But one thing he did was he did allow himself. He overcame any legitimate fears he had and allowed himself to be put in a position where he could make a suggestion like that and be selected.
Right.
And so there's a part of me that says that maybe a learning point from there is that when we get to those inflection points is to stop and realize, okay, this is one of those points. I need to position myself to be available.
Yep. Yeah, like we said, see it. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing it, having the time and the energy and the bandwidth, I guess,
right,
to do that. So cool. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. It's a
you
good conversation, and I hope that you all that are watching, and maybe you're in the middle of something right now, or there's a decision or recognition to say, you're discerning where God's leading, and look around, take a moment to see it, take a moment to take a chance,
and even if it doesn't work out the first time, keep pushing.
Yep, and we'll still love you.
Yep. And we'll celebrate.
We will celebrate it. Yes, maybe with like cake and balloons and things. I like cake.
Sounds good.
I like cake. It's very good.
Very good.
Awesome. Well, make sure you join us on Sunday. We're going to continue the series for this next month up until Lent, and go into the next couple chapters of Joseph and see all these dreams, how they come to fruition. So stay warm, have a great week, and we'll see you then, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.